Prologue. Aquitaine, 1082 CE. The first time the walls began to sing, Brother Thael thought it was his own blood roaring in his ears. The stone of the scriptorium had always held sound in strange ways, footsteps echoing twice, whispered prayers lingering like faint breath. But that night it was different. The air itself seemed to tighten and thrum, as if the whole monastery were a drumhead under some invisible hand. He bent lower over the parchment, the quill hovering, the ink catching candlelight. Outside, winter wind scoured the hilltop, making the wooden shutters knock like restless knuckles. Inside, the world held perfectly still except for the hum. It started low, below hearing, a pressure on his chest, a faint vibration in the table. Then slowly, a tone rose from the depths of silence, pure, unwavering, too steady to be anything as fickle as weather. Thael froze. "Domini ad adiuvandum me festina," he whispered. "Lord, make haste to help me." The candle flame quivered, then leaned toward the far corner of the room, toward the book. It lay apart from the others, not on the shelves with their clumsy wooden chains, not in the guarded chest with the Carolingian psalters, but alone on a simple stand of oak in the niche near the floor. It had arrived 2 months ago with a pilgrim who spoke an Occitan he barely understood, and eyes that understood too much. The man had pushed the wrapped object into Thael's hands and said only, "For when the stone sings again." Thael had taken it to Prior Mathieu, who frowned at the lack of title, the unadorned binding, the pages that crackled like dry leaves. The text inside was no Latin he knew, and he knew many. Not Greek, not Hebrew, not any hand he'd seen in all his years of copying. The characters curved and tessellated in strange lattices, strokes rising like reeds in water, dots hovering where no sound should be. "Put it in the scriptorium," the prior had said. "We shall pray on it. Perhaps God will grant understanding." God had not. Or if he had, he'd done it in a language that made no sense. Until the walls began to hum. The tone grew stronger now, like a psalm stretched into a single eternal note. The hairs on Thael's arms lifted. Ink in the little well trembled. The quill in his fingers twitched. The book on the oak stand shivered. "No," he whispered, but his feet were already moving. He set the quill down, neat habit even in terror, and crossed the room. Each step seemed muffled, as though the stone floor were no longer entirely solid. The hum grew louder as he approached, resonating in his teeth, his skull. The book vibrated visibly. The candle flame bent toward it like a compass needle. Thael fell to his knees in front of it. Up close, the script glowed faintly, though no pigment on earth should shine like that. Soft off-white, like bone catching starlight. The pages riffled in a wind that was not there. The tone sharpened. Another joined it, a higher harmonic, a faint thread weaving above the main note. The two created a slow undulation, like breathing made sound. Thael clutched his rosary. "If this is not of you, O Lord." The book opened. No hand touched it. No draft flipped the parchment. It parted itself at the center, pages fanning, then settling as if some invisible reader had found a favorite place. Thael's prayer broke in his throat. The letters moved. They didn't blur or run like ink in rain. They rolled, reconfigured, strokes sliding into new alignments. Lines of text rearranged themselves into patterns, curving like rib cages across the page. He felt as though he were watching the inside of an enormous breathing lung. The humming intensified. Thael tried to stand. He couldn't. It wasn't paralysis, but compulsion. His hands moved of their own will to the small desk beside the stand where blank parchment waited. He grabbed his own quill. His fingers curled into the familiar grip, but it didn't feel like his hand anymore. He heard a voice then, not in his ears, in the bones behind his ears, in the marrow, in the soft meat of his mind. A murmur, not Latin, not any tongue, but carrying the heavy weight of instruction. Right. He tried to fight it. The rosary slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. "Saints preserve me," he croaked. "Right. His hand plunged the quill into ink, blotting too much, dripping. The parchment blurred as tears filled his eyes. His wrist jerked. He began. The lines came fast, fluid, his hand skating across the page in patterns he'd never practiced. Curves and hooks, nested shapes, tiny marks like constellations. His arm burned. His back screamed. He wrote through it all. The candle bent forward, guttering as the hum rose even higher. The walls shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling in fine streams. Far away, he dimly heard a bell begin to ring. Someone in the tower had felt the vibration. Brother Thael's eyes rolled back. His hand did not stop. He saw things behind his closed lids, a circle of 8 shining lights, a world split by cracking stone, seas boiling with sound, a woman's face he did not know, framed by dark hair whipped by unnatural wind. Right. His hand obeyed long after the ink dried, scoring the parchment, then the wood beneath. Blood mingled with the ink. A crack shot down the wall beside him. The candle shattered its own wax in a burst of liquid flame and went out. The humming cut off abruptly. Silence fell as if the world had been shoved underwater. Thael gasped awake. He was still sitting at the little desk, fingers cramped around the quill. The room smelled of smoke and iron and something like ozone, though he had never known that word. His heart hammered. Sweat chilled his body. On the desk before him, 3 full sheets of parchment lay covered edge to edge in the strange script. His own handwriting, his own hand. He didn't recognize a single symbol. Brother Thael stared. His breath came in fast, shallow bursts. Behind him in the dark, something else hummed very softly, no longer the walls, but the space inside his skull. The sound rose once, swift and cutting like a knife of light, and a whisper followed. In a tongue he did not know, it said distinctly, intimately, "Mira?" Thael screamed. The cry echoed off the stone, down the cloister, through the sleeping monastery, into the cold night over Aquitaine. The echo did not die for a long, long time. Chapter 1. Present day, North Atlantic coastline. The sea looked like hammered lead under the low Arctic sky. From the helicopter window, Dr. Mira Ellison watched the waves smash themselves to white foam against a granite cliff that seemed too stark, too abrupt to be entirely natural. The pilot's voice crackled in her headset. "On your right, Dr. Ellison." She turned. The monastery emerged from mist like a structure half-remembered from a dream. No elegant spires, no Gothic tracery, just plain stone walls rising sheer from the cliff edge, roofs huddled against the wind, slate dark with moisture. A bell tower jutted up like a finger, capped with a simple cross that glinted faintly in the brief, stingy sunlight. "That's St. Catherine of the Deep," the pilot said. "You sure about this?" "Yes," Mira said. "Set us down in the courtyard if you can." The pilot didn't comment, but she saw the skeptical glance. As far as he was concerned, this was an overpaid geologist with grant money to burn, coming to poke at one of the last outposts of stubborn religious solitude on a frozen rock near nowhere. She wasn't a geologist. Not exactly. Mira checked the seismograph data on the tablet in her lap one more time. The monitor trace was a forest of spikes and valleys, highlighted in pale blue at the times of interest. The anomaly that had pulled her out of her warm office in Vancouver and onto 3 different flights, and this rattling helicopter rose off the screen like a jagged tooth. It wasn't a normal microtremor pattern, not induced by passing storms or carving ice or distant tectonic shifts. The waveform had structure, repetition, harmonics. It looked, she thought, not for the first time, more like a piece of music than an earthquake. The first reading had come from a temporary seismometer on a Norwegian research vessel that had anchored off this stretch of coast for a week of boring routine. They'd recorded a series of faint tremors at irregular intervals. Usually that would be a curiosity at most, filed away. But the technician was a former student of hers and had a sense for patterns. He'd sent her the file at 2 in the morning with a one-line message. "Is this alive?" It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. Waves of rock under stress were not organisms. Still, the waveform had an oddity she couldn't shake. The tremor's fundamental frequency sat around 33 Hz, subsonic to human ears. But layered above it were discrete overtones clustered at intervals that didn't match any known resonance of the local geology. They were too clean, too neatly spaced, like harmonics from a well-tuned string instrument. Then there was the timing. Every tremor event, there had been 7 in total, had occurred between 2:13 and 2:15 local time. To the second, she'd stared at that timestamp row for half an hour. "Okay," she'd muttered to the empty lab. "You have my attention." Now, as the helicopter banked low over the monastery, the impact of the air and the smell of salt and fuel snapped her back into the present. Her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. The monastery looked smaller from above, fenced in by raw sea on 3 sides and rolling ice-scabbed tundra on the 4th. No roads, no visible vehicles. Just a rough stone trail winding up from a rock platform that might serve as a landing spot for boats when the waves weren't trying to claw the island apart. A life of prayer and manual labor in this kind of isolation, she thought, would either burn everything unnecessary out of you or crush you flat. Maybe both. The helicopter hovered, then settled into the inner courtyard, rotors blasting snow and gravel into spirals. Mira ducked her head, grabbed her backpack and equipment case, and jumped down when the pilot signaled. Cold slammed into her like a physical blow. It was the northern kind of cold, different from the mountain storms of her Canadian youth. Less dramatic, more thorough. The kind that seeped through every seam and laughed at technical fabrics. She tugged her hat down, tightened her scarf, and gave the pilot a quick thumbs up. He pointed to his watch and mouthed, 4 hours, then lifted away, swallowed by mist and rotor thunder. Suddenly the courtyard was very quiet. For a moment she simply stood there, breath fogging, listening to the wind scrape over the stone. The walls of the monastery rose around her, their smooth grey surfaces broken only by narrow windows and stout wooden doors. Snow lay in drifts along the edges, dirty with blown grit. A bell rang once, high and clear. The sound cut through the thin air. She turned toward the cloister door as it opened. The nun who stepped out was small and wiry, her face a network of fine wrinkles that made it hard to tell her age. 60? 70? The habit she wore was rough wool, darkened with years of washing, and her boots looked like they'd served 3 owners before her. She smiled. It transformed her from a figure in a photograph to someone startlingly alive. "Dr. Ellison!" she called, voice sure despite the wind. "Yes." Mira shouldered her pack and hoisted the instrument case. "You must be Sister Elia." The nun nodded, coming forward. Her eyes, Mira noticed, were bright blue and extraordinarily clear. "Welcome to St. Catherine of the Deep. The trip was all right?" "Cold, no complaints." Mira hesitated, then added, "Thank you for agreeing to let me intrude." "Intrude?" Elia laughed softly. "We have hosted kings and fishermen, faithful and apostate. A scientist is a pleasant addition to the list. Come, you'll freeze out here." As they walked under the stone arch into the covered walkway that circled the courtyard, Mira slanted her a look. "And you're sure you're okay with me installing sensors? I know it's not exactly quiet work." "The prior agreed," Elia said. "St. Catherine's has always welcomed observers of the natural world. God wrote 2 books after all, the Scripture and the Creation. We try to read both." Something in the phrasing made Mira smile despite the cold. "Then you might find this one interesting." "Oh," Elia said. "The Earth has been behaving badly again?" Mira blinked. "You saw the report?" "We don't have much internet," Elia said, "but we do have radio and curious younger sisters, and the fishermen talk. You're the tremor doctor, yes?" "Acoustic-seismologist," Mira said. "But sure, tremor doctor." And you came because it shook oddly. Elia's eyes held hers. Because it sang wrong. The phrase sent a little prickle down Mira's neck. I came because your island produced microseismic events with a harmonic structure we don't understand, she said carefully. But yes, it sang wrong. Sister Elia nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. We said so, she murmured. We said, the earth sings down there. They stopped for a moment in the cloister. Through the inner arch, Mira glimpsed the chapel, dim light filtering through stained glass, stone floor worn by centuries of feet, the faint scent of incense clinging like memory. How long have you been here? Mira asked. Nearly 40 years, Elia said. I arrived at 23, a very angry girl then. I thought solitude would silence everything. I was wrong. A faint smile. The silence here is full of voices. You know how that sounds to a neuroscientist, Mira said before she could stop herself. Elia's gaze sharpened. Do you treat them as pathology or as information? Mira faltered, caught off guard by the question. Depends on the case. My work is more on the geophysical side. Resonance mapping, microtremors. Sometimes we pick up anthropogenic signals and have to filter them out. Ships, drilling, fans. She shrugged. You'd be surprised how far one badly balanced machine can ring through the mantle. And this one, Elia asked. This badly balanced machine of ours? I don't know yet, Mira said. Elia nodded once. Then we shall listen together. She gestured down the corridor. Come. There is something you must see before you place your devices. They passed through cool stone hallways that smelled of stone and beeswax and old paper. Voices drifted from a refectory, soft French, Norwegian, Russian. St. Catherine's was apparently more international than its isolated position suggested. As they walked, Mira's mind ticked through tasks. She'd need to place broadband seismometers at multiple points around the monastery and island, then tie them into the main data logger she'd brought. The battery packs should last for weeks in this temperature if sheltered properly. She had geophones, hydrophones in case there was subglacial melt, a small array of environmental sensors to log temperature, air pressure, barometric shifts. And yet, underneath the familiar checklist, something older stirred. The child who used to stand with her geologist father in narrow canyons in British Columbia and hum until the rock threw her own voice back to her, twisted into eerie harmonies. The teenager who lay on the floor while her composer mother played with tuning forks and frequency sweepers, mapping resonance in the human body. The earth sings down there. In the cloister's far corner, Elia opened a heavy door with a key that looked older than the nation Mira was born in. There are many ways down, she said. This is the oldest. A breath of air rose from the stairwell beyond, dry, cold, and carrying an odd tang of something metallic and subterranean. The hairs on Mira's arms rose under her thermal layers. She shifted the equipment case from one hand to the other. Is this where the tremors originate, as far as you can tell? As far as we can tell, Elia said, stepping into the dark. Though we did not need your machines to know when the earth turned in her sleep, we felt it in our bones, and... She hesitated, then stepped down another stone stair. And we heard it in the books. Mira frowned. You heard it in what? But Sister Elia was already descending, her figure swallowed by shadow. After a heartbeat's pause, Mira followed. The stairs were worn in the center, the stone concave from centuries of feet. Moisture slicked some of the treads, making footing treacherous. Elia moved with the unthinking ease of long habit, one hand on the wall. The air cooled further as they went down, and the sound of the storm above faded until it became a distant, steady rush. After what felt like 5 stories, the space opened into a vestibule cut straight from the basalt. Here, a modern door, steel with a lock panel and an old-fashioned deadbolt, looked almost comical against the ancient rock. Elia produced a second key from inside her sleeve and worked the lock with a series of practiced turns. The door opened on a quiet hiss. As it swung inward, a faint vibration kissed Mira's face. It was not a draft. It was not her imagination. It was a fluttering in the air pressure, a tiny variation that brushed her skin in a wave. Her pulse jumped. She stepped through. The resonance chamber was larger than she expected. Her first impression was of darkness. Only a few lamps burned, simple shielded bulbs mounted at intervals along the rough-hewn walls. Their light cast more shadow than illumination, but enough to show the basic shape. A barrel-vaulted space maybe 20 meters long, 10 wide, ceiling arching in a smooth curve of basalt that looked almost polished where some geological process had melted and refrozen it. The floor was smoother, though still irregular. Moisture shimmered in some places, forming thin rimes of ice. In the center of the chamber, a circular platform rose knee-high, its surface composed of black stone inlaid with something paler, lines intersecting in geometric patterns. Mira felt the vibration more strongly here. It was like standing on the deck of a ship at low speed, subtle, omnipresent, producing a faint tightness in the chest and skull. She set down her equipment case. "You feel that? Right now?" Elia nodded. "Even when it is quiet, it is never truly silent. We call it the heart below." "Is there known volcanic activity under the island?" Mira asked, almost automatic, though she'd checked the geological surveys. "Magmatic intrusions can create—" "No volcano," Elia said, "not for many lifetimes. The geologists who came before you said the rock here is old and tired and does not wish to move." She tilted her head, listening. "But something beneath it disagrees." She walked toward the far end of the chamber. For the first time, Mira noticed another structure there beyond the circle of the platform. It was a niche, a sort of apse carved into the rock. Its walls were lined with shelves, though not in any orderly library fashion. Ledges, human-height recesses, niches barely large enough for a hand-sized object. Many were empty. One was not. At the center, raised just above eye level on a protruding shelf, an object rested under a thick sheet of glass. It was a book. From where she stood, Mira could already tell it was old. The binding was leather of a color that had probably been rich once, but had long since faded toward the gray-brown of storm clouds. The spine bore no title. The corners were reinforced with what might be brass or bronze, worn smooth by time. The page's edges, visible where the cover didn't quite meet them, were darkened to the tone of parchment that had known many hands. Except this had not known many hands. Every instinct in her said so. It radiated a strange untouchedness, like an artifact from a dig that had never been properly catalogued. She took an involuntary step closer. The hum seemed to tighten, to focus. "That," Elia said softly, "is why I called you." Mira tore her eyes away long enough to look at her. "The book?" "At first, we thought it was coincidence." Elia's voice held a careful neutrality, like someone edging up to a memory that could still bite. "We have had old books down here long before my time. A few came with the first sisters when they took over from the monks. A few were gifts from passing scholars. This one arrived long before I was born. We do not know from where." "Do you know how old it is?" Mira asked, even as she mentally catalogued the limited humidity, the stable temperature. Good preservation conditions, despite the chill. "The brothers who were here before us made a note," Elia said. She nodded toward a small desk just outside the niche, bearing a lamp and a stack of carefully wrapped folders. "They thought perhaps the 12th century, or earlier. There are older things in Europe, I know, but that is not what matters." "What matters?" Mira asked, though part of her already suspected. Elia stepped closer to the glass case, laid 2 fingers on it. "When the tremors come, the book hums." Mira stared at her. The word hums was too human, too anthropomorphic for the neutral physicist's comfort. "As in, vibrates?" "As in sings," Elia said. "Listen." For a moment, nothing changed. The room held its low, steady thrumming. Then, as if some distant switch had been flipped, a different tone slid into existence. It began almost imperceptibly, a filament of sound above the broadband murmur of rock. Mira didn't hear it so much as feel it, the faintest fizz in her teeth, a tickle deep in her ears. It rose from somewhere just under hearing into a narrow band of audibility, a pure, unwavering note. Without meaning to, she stepped toward the glass. The book was shaking, not violently, not as if in an earthquake. The pages, though still closed, were quivering, a rapid, subtle flutter like the tremor in a muscle on the verge of cramp. The glass vibrated with it, a faint rattling that set off sympathetic tremors in the metal frame. Her skin tightened. Her rational mind scrambled for footholds. Maybe the shelf is anchored to some... It is anchored to the rock itself, Elia said quietly. We tested. It does not move when you jump up and down on the floor, or when storms beat the island, or when we slam the doors. It moves only when the deep singing begins. Mira stepped right up to the glass. Her breath fogged it. She wiped a circle clear with one gloved hand. The hum intensified. Or perhaps what intensified was its awareness of her. That was what it felt like. Attention, turning. She pressed fingers to the glass, ignoring the instinctive flicker of anxiety. This was their relic. What if she damaged it? What if the oils on her skin? The vibration traveled into her fingertips, up the bones, into her wrist. 33 hertz, she thought automatically, because her brain had spent years learning to approximate frequencies by feel. Add maybe 66 and higher, clean harmonics. Do you have electricity running down here? She asked, grasping at easier straws. Any equipment, motors, fans, anything with a stable rotation rate? Nothing that was not turned off hours ago, Ilya said. Our lights run from the generator when we need them. The generator is on the cliff at the opposite end of the complex. It is still. She reached out and, with a small, careful gesture, laid her hand on Mira's forearm. The simple human touch grounded her just enough to take a step back. I can place seismometers here, Mira said, hearing her own voice as if through cotton. On the floor, near the walls, and accelerometers on the glass and the shelf. We can track the vibration patterns and see if they match any known dash. The note shifted, just a fraction. Enough that a slow oscillation began in the amplitude, a gentle throbbing like a heartbeat. Mira's own heart kicked in her chest in time with it. Something in her pulse entrained itself to the hum. She felt a weird stutter of fear, like a misstep at speed. Her vision sharpened around the edges of the book, the rest of the chamber falling into a soft blur. She reached out again, this time without deciding to, palm flattening to the glass. The shock of cold barely registered. Mira? Sister Elia said. She hardly heard her. The hum grew louder in her bones, though not in the air. The note climbed fractionally, the harmonics thickening into a chord. It wasn't random, she thought dimly. There was a pattern in the shift, an orderly dance of frequencies. The book stopped vibrating. The sound cut off so abruptly it left an after-image like a tone-shaped hole in the air. Mira staggered, catching herself against the niche wall. Fuck, she gasped, then flushed. Sorry, I just... No need to apologize, Elia said. She sounded calm, but her fingers were pale where they gripped the edge of the desk. It is persuasive, is it not? What the hell is it? Mira whispered. A book, Elia said, and something that uses it. The phrasing once again hit her in exactly the place between science and story where she was most vulnerable. Something that uses it. She cleared her throat. Can I get closer to it, without the glass? Elia hesitated. Mira saw an internal struggle in her eyes, the claustral instinct to protect relics versus the curiosity that had invited Mira here at all. We do not remove the cover, she said, nodding at the glass, except on very rare occasions, and never alone. But, she searched Mira's face. You need to touch it, don't you? Mira thought of her grant proposal full of precise language about microseismic mapping and acoustic anomalies. Of the faculty review committee, wary but intrigued. Of her father, who'd died under a mountain he trusted too much. Of her mother, who'd played a glass harmonica until neighbors complained of headaches. "Yes," she said simply. Elia held her gaze for one more long heartbeat, then nodded. "Very well," she said. "But we will do it carefully, and we will pray first." Mira almost said she didn't pray, but that wasn't entirely true. She prayed to data, to clean peaks in spectra, to theories that matched reality. Out here, under this stone, with that impossible note still echoing in her bones, she was willing to accept a wider definition. "Fine," she said. "Let me set up my equipment and then we can ask whichever book we're talking about nicely." Elia's mouth twitched, maybe in amusement, maybe in disapproval. "We will ask very nicely," she said softly. "It has been sleeping for a long time." By the time the first sensor went live, Mira had already forgotten the cold. She worked briskly but methodically, hands sure as she unpacked the compact broadband seismometers and accelerometers, attaching cables, checking connections. She placed one sensor on the basalt floor near the center platform, another near the back wall, a third as close as she dared to the book niche. 2 accelerometers she taped gently to the glass cover, their leads trailing back to the main data logger, which she placed on the desk by Elia's lamp. As she worked, the nun watched with unfeigned interest, peppering her with questions about how the devices worked, what exactly they measured, how precise they could be. "We're looking for ground motion on the order of nanometers," Mira said. "Very, very small displacements. Think of it as a needle on a record, but the record is the Earth." "And you will see the hum?" Elia asked. "If it's real," Mira said. "Yes. It should show up as peaks at specific frequencies in the spectrogram." She connected the last cable and flicked a switch. "All right. Let's see what our new friend has to say." The laptop screen filled with scrolling lines as the instrument started logging. She ran a quick calibration sweep, tapping lightly on the floor to confirm the sensors responded as expected. Peaks appeared at the impact times, then decayed. The baseline noise was low for such an old structure, probably because of their distance from major human activity. "Good," she murmured. "Very good." Her fingers danced on the keyboard, setting a rolling FFT analysis. Colored spectrogram bands crawled across the screen. For a minute or two, only the normal low-frequency hum of the Earth appeared. The microseisms generated by faraway storms, the distant murmur of tectonic groaning, the chaos of natural noise. Then, as if cued by some invisible conductor, a line appeared at 33 hertz. It rose from the noise floor like a thread, thin at first, then brightening. Mira's heartbeat picked up to match. "There," she said, voice hushed. The peak at 33 hertz sharpened. A second line appeared above it at roughly 66 hertz. Then another, faint but distinct, at 99. Harmonics, crisp, narrow band. The accelerometer channels on the glass spiked. The book was humming again. Mira felt the vibration in her feet now too, a faint tremor traveling up through her boots. It wasn't imagination. The tremor channel on the floor sensor confirmed it. Not huge displacement. If she'd been upstairs, she might have thought it nothing more than a truck passing on a road. But here, amplified by the enclosed space, it became something intimate. "It's so clean," she breathed. "Natural sources don't do this. Even fluid-induced tremors are more..." The 33 hertz line shifted upward just slightly. The 66 and 99 moved with it, staying in precise ratio. The peak amplitude wavered in a slow, sinusoidal pattern. Her own pulse stuttered to follow. She swallowed. "Something's modulating it." "Something," Elia echoed. The book beneath the glass vibrated harder now, pages singing with motion. The hum in Mira's bones blurred the boundary between outside and inside. Her hand moved toward it, fingers stretching. Elia said nothing. The moment her palm touched the glass, the room seemed to narrow around the book. The hum surged, filling her head like pressure, pressing against her eyes. She saw the spectrogram only as a smeared strip of color at the edge of her vision. The peaks were blazing white now. 33.2 hertz, 33.4, up, down, up again. Steady rhythm. A signal. She opened her mouth to say something she would later never remember what, and the world tilted. It was as if the hum stepped through her skin. The chamber dissolved, not physically but perceptually. The rough basalt walls faded to a grey haze. The only solid objects were her own hand and the book under the glass, which now shone with a muted inner light. The pages fluttered, though there was no air here to move them. She had the dizzy impression of being halfway between waking and a deep, heavy sleep. Hypnagogia, some clinical part of her noted distantly. Sensory networks decoupling. The hum increased in complexity, not louder but richer. More overtones joined, threading together into a shifting chord. Beneath it, deeper than any audio, something pulsed at intervals that matched her heartbeat almost exactly. A voice emerged. It wasn't like hearing someone speak English or any other language. It was like a chord resolution, like the moment a long discordant phrase in music suddenly snapped into place. Meaning flooded into her, unmoored to particular syllables. Mira, her own name. Layered, not in unison but in chorus, as though 100 throats spoke it from 100 distances at different times, all converging here. Mira jerked back as if struck. Her hand tore off the glass. The hum cut off so sharply she staggered, stomach lurching as if she'd stepped from a moving train. The chamber slammed back into focus. Stone. Lamp. Sister Elia's hand grasping her elbow hard. "Easy," the nun said. "Easy, child. Breathe." Mira sucked in cold, dusty air. Her vision tunneled, then widened. The laptop chimed with an alert. The spectrogram had gone from narrow peaks to flat noise. Her own breath sounded loud in the sudden quiet. "You heard it," Elia said softly. "Didn't you?" Mira swallowed. Her mouth tasted of copper like after biting her tongue. Her fingers tingled. She shook her head, as if she could dislodge the lingering echo. "That's not possible. I must have. Microseismic vibrations can induce all kinds of perceptual—" "What did it say?" Elia asked. Mira met her eyes. It took an effort of will to say the word out loud. "My name," she said. "It said my name." Elia let out a slow breath that might have been relief, or dread, or both. "It did the same to Brother Albin in my first year here," she said. "He ran from this room and never came back. Left the order, left the island. Said God had spoken and it was not any God he knew." "That wasn't God," Mira said hoarsely. "That was resonance-induced auditory hallucination. My brain trying to pattern random noise into something familiar." Even as she said it, she knew it wasn't enough. The precision with which the vibration had tracked her heartbeat. The way the frequencies had shifted in deliberate ratios. The sense of being addressed. Elia watched her, unblinking. "We have many words for what speaks through it," she said. "God, demon, memory, echo. We are not trained in your sciences. We do not know your words. We just know that when the earth sings that way, the book wakes. And when the book wakes, it calls names." She patted Mira's arm once firmly. "Come, I will show you why your name may not have been the first." The forbidden records were kept in a small room off the main library, behind a door that looked like any other. Elia led her there after giving her an hour to rest, drink hot tea, and pretend to adjust her instruments rather than sit and stare at her hands, remembering how they had moved without her. "You call them forbidden?" Mira asked as Elia unlocked the door. "That's a little on the nose." "Forbidden because they make the very devout doubt," Elia said. "And they make the doubters see too much. Neither is safe in large doses." She swung the door open. "Here." The room smelled of vellum and old ink and faint mold. It held 2 wooden tables, a single chair, and shelves from floor to ceiling, their contents wrapped in cloth or stored in acid-free boxes. Electric light here was a small lamp on the table, currently off. Daylight filtered in through a narrow frosted window high in the wall, enough to navigate by but not to read. "I will turn on the lamp," Elia said. "We are not so cruel as to make you decipher in the dark." She flicked the switch. Soft yellow light pooled on the table. "Are these all about the book?" Mira asked. "About the book, about the stone, about those who dreamed." Elia moved with practiced ease, pulling out particular bundles. "We have older records higher up, but they are copies. These are originals from the time of the brothers, and some from our early years." She set a box on the table and opened it with a reverence Mira usually saw only in museums. Inside lay a stack of parchment folios, each labeled in neat ink in the monastery's own hand. Names, dates, brief Latin phrases, visio, somnium, scriptura. "Dreams," Mira murmured. "Dreams that wrote," Elia said. She opened the first folio carefully. The pages inside were older, the ink browned, the Latin formal. At the top of the first was a date, Anno Domini 1082. The second line, De Miraculo in Scriptoriis. Mira's Latin was rusty but serviceable, helped by years of scientific abstracts in Romance languages. She read aloud, haltingly at first, then more smoothly. "On the miracle in the scriptorium, on the night when Brother Thael seemed possessed of a hand not his own." She trailed off, eyes scanning more quickly. "He wrote 3 pages in unknown letters, then cried out in terror. The walls shook. The book vibrated, as if moved by wind, though the lamps burned steady." Elia listened, hands folded in her sleeves. "He said," Mira translated, "that a voice had passed through his skull like iron through water, and it spoke a name he did not know. Mira?" She frowned. "That can't be right." She double-checked the script. The letters were there, clear and simple. Mira, using the medieval scribes' slightly different forms but unmistakable. Her own name, written in a 12th century hand. A chill went down her spine. "The brothers believed it to be the name of a demon," Elia said quietly, "or an angel, or a saint yet to be born. They argued in the cloister for days. Brother Thael fasted and scourged himself. In the end, they decided to record it and leave the rest to God." Mira kept reading. The account described how Brother Thael's pages had been carefully stored apart from the profane texts, how later brothers had tried to decipher the strange characters and failed. It mentioned subsequent tremors, other nights when the stone sang and the book trembled, and certain monks awoke with ink-stained fingers and texts they did not recall writing. The dates spanned centuries, not frequently, maybe once every 4 or 5 generations, but enough to form a pattern. "Look at this one," Elia said, sliding another folio across. 1603, then 17-something, then a gap until 1912. And then, she tapped the final entry, 1978. Mira scanned the 20th century Latin, relieved when it gradually yielded to French. The style shifted from the formal Benedictine chronicler's hand to something more colloquial, then to a typewritten page. "We had a sister then," Elia said. "Sister Magdalena. She was intense, very devout, very frightened of her own mind. She believed every stray thought was temptation, the perfect kind of soul for this place, perhaps." "She dreamed?" Mira asked. "She dreamed," Elia said. "She woke with a pen in her hand and pages before her in a language none of us knew. She claimed a voice had spoken through her. We thought at first it was a breakdown. We had her examined. The doctors said it was a form of dissociative state. Fugue, they called it." Mira's attention sharpened at the word. She'd studied fugue states in grad school, a disruption of identity, memory, consciousness. Rare, often triggered by trauma. "We locked the book away," Elia said. "We stopped going down there except to check the foundations. But it did not stop the tremors. Only their frequency changed." "How often?" Mira asked. Elia met her eyes. "Every 33 years, more or less." Mira let out a disbelieving laugh that sounded too high in the small room. That's apophenia. You can make patterns from any, at least as often as your earthquakes, Elia said calmly. Perhaps more. Mira exhaled, long, then scrubbed her hands over her face. Part of her wanted to shove the folios aside, label this entire thing as an elaborate monastery legend, and go back to the clean comfort of her instruments. Another part, quieter but more insistent, was already trying to fit this new data into a model. A resonant geological anomaly under the monastery, a book that vibrated in time with it in ways that tracked the tremors' spectral content. Episodes of automatic writing in unknown scripts correlated with peak events. A repeated name, her name. "Why me?" she said aloud, before she could stop herself. Elia tilted her head. "You applied for the grant?" "That's not funny," Mira said. "No, it is not," Elia agreed. She reached into the folio stack and pulled out a modern envelope. "Because there is one more thing we did not put in any official report." She slid the envelope across the table. Mira hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a sheet of printer paper folded twice. She unfolded it. It bore a printout of an email, her email, the one she'd sent 6 months ago to half a dozen polar research stations, introducing herself, describing her interest in microseisms around Arctic coastlines, asking if they'd be willing to host instruments. She'd written it late at night on a whim during a bout of insomnia. She scanned the header. It had been forwarded again, then finally to a generic address at catharines.deepet. "We receive little digital correspondence," Elia said. "Sister Marie checks our account maybe once a week when the connection cooperates." Mira looked at her. "So you got this and we ignored it," Elia said matter-of-factly. "We do not answer many requests to use our island for experiments, and the tremors then were not yet alarming. But then..." She reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second page. This one looked different. The paper was off-white, the edges crinkled slightly. The ink was blue, written in a careful, slightly shaky hand. It was a letter, addressed to no one, or rather the addressee line bore a name written very precisely, to Dr. Mira Ellison. The handwriting below was smaller. "I do not know this woman. I do not know what her work is. I only saw her name in a dream. I woke with it written on my hand. I think the stone remembers her. I think it wishes to speak to her. I will place this letter with her printed message. If she comes, perhaps she will understand. Sister Magdalena, 1978. Mira felt the bottom of her stomach drop out. This is some kind of... She searched for a phrasing that would make this less horrifyingly direct. Retroactive coincidence. You found my email, went through the archives, found this letter, and decided it matched enough that you could... Sister Magdalena died in 1981, Elia said quietly. In a landslide on the North Cliff. There is no one here who knew your name before your email arrived. The room seemed suddenly too small, the lamplight too bright. Mira stared at the letter, at the date, at the shaky loop of the initial M that matched her own in unnerving ways. Her mind, well trained to model complex geophysical systems, simply stopped. Sister Elia watched her with something like pity. You see why we do not show this to the younger sisters, she said. It is too much. They have made their choice to live in the world of faith. This is another world. Another world, Mira repeated hollowly. One that overlaps, Elia said. With yours, perhaps. This resonance. You study. Perhaps it is a way of listening to whatever spoke to Magdalena, to Thael, to the others. To me, Mira said. Elia nodded. The Codex called you long before you arrived, Mira, she said. We are only the messengers. Chapter 2. 4,000 kilometers away, in a cramped apartment above a noisy street in Lisbon, Jonas Vale scrolled through the news feed and felt his stomach go cold. He hadn't been looking for anything dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening with nothing particular about it. which meant he'd done what he did most nights. Poured himself a glass of cheap Vinho Verde, settled at the scarred wooden desk that held his laptop and a tottering pile of printouts, and opened his favorite aggregation of obscure channels. The site was technically a public front for an NGO that did crowdsourced verification of environmental data, but if you knew which parts of it to click, it became something else. A bulletin board for people who monitored the anomalies of the world, radar glitches, seismic irregularities, unexplained outages in undersea cables, things that might be nothing or the first hints of something very much not nothing. Jonas had learned long ago that if you wanted to know what was really happening, you didn't look at what authorities said, you looked at the edges. And at the edges tonight was a thread titled Arctic Microseismic Anomaly. Anyone seen this? He clicked. A bored Norwegian technician had posted a spectrogram screenshot and a short note. Recorded off St. Catherine's, North Atlantic. Regular tremors between 2:13 and 2:15, local weird harmonics. Boss says it's probably ship noise. Doesn't look like ship noise. Several responses had piled up. One from a grad student at Utrecht, hypothesizing an underwater landslide. Another from someone anonymous, handled Deep Trace, who posted a quick and dirty analysis showing the fundamental frequency at 33 Hz with clean multiples. Jonas's eyes snagged on one particular reply a few lines down. Ellison M. Not ship noise, not landslide either. Harmonics too stable. Could be anthropogenic, but signal doesn't match common industrial sources. Could be newly forming microfractures in uniquely constrained geometry. Fluid resonance in subsurface cavity. Speculative non-geological source coupling into rock. I'm heading there in person next week. I'll set up a broader sensor array and share if I find anything. Mira Ellison, UBC seismology/acoustic physics. He read the post twice. Non-geological source coupling into rock. The phrasing was cautious, probably deliberately so, but Jonas had read enough carefully hedged scientific statements to hear what hummed between those words. He sipped his wine. It tasted sour all of a sudden. St. Catherine of the Deep. He knew that name. He pushed his chair back, ignoring the protest of his lower back, and went to the file cabinet in the corner. It was an actual metal cabinet, old and dented, because for some things, paper still felt safer than drives. Second drawer. S-tab. He flipped through folders until he found one labeled simply SB, St. C's Silence Bureau, St. Catherine. He hadn't looked at it in years. The folder contained hard copies of documents he'd once risked his life to obtain. Redacted memos, internal protocol drafts, field reports. The earliest was from 1954, the most recent, 1999. One had a handwritten note on it in his own, younger scrawled handwriting. They know about it, and they're scared. He skimmed until a phrase leapt out. Subject: non-standard harmonic tremor activity beneath monastic complex. Hypothesis: low probability resonant signal from redacted. Recommendation: maintain remote surveillance. Do not engage without further directive. Another later: subject: potential memetic hazard. Codex artifact, interaction with subject M, redacted. Strong subjective reports, no objective verification. The Silence Bureau had known about St. Catherine for at least half a century, which meant whatever Ellison thought she was going to find there, she wasn't walking into a clean field. He studied her brief profile on the university site. He'd already done that, of course, after looking up her name. PhD in geophysics. Acoustic-seismology specialization, publications in highly cited journals, a string of fellowships and grants that indicated both talent and tenacity, and now, apparently, a curiosity that put her directly in the shadow of an entity even journalists called only the Bureau in hushed tones. Idiot, he said, not sure whether he meant her himself or the world in general. He clicked through to her institutional email. It would be stupid to contact her. Stupider still to mention anything about what he knew. If the Bureau had a watcher on her, and they almost certainly did, he'd be painting a bright target on his own back. He typed a blank message anyway. Dr. Ellison saw your post on Deep Trace re St. Catherine's. You're right, It's not ship noise." He stared at the blinking cursor. Then he highlighted the line and deleted it. Number. Better to watch from a distance. For now. His gaze slid back to the old memo headline. Potential memetic hazard, Codex artifact. He'd once thought the Silence Bureau's obsession with memetic hazards was paranoia. That had been before the Madrid incident. Jonas rubbed his temples and closed the folder. "Don't go poking that stone, Dr. Ellison," he muttered to the empty room. "Some songs aren't meant for our ears." But he knew she would. People like her couldn't help it. A little part of him, the part he'd been trying to smother for years, was glad. Because if the Codex was waking up again, someone needed to be there who could hear what it said. Chapter 3. That night, in a narrow cell with a crucifix on one wall and a small desk on the other, Mira dreamed of a library she had never seen. She'd meant to stay up and go over the first few hours of sensor data. After the episode in the resonance chamber, she'd convinced Elia and herself that she was fine. Just a transient vestibular disturbance, maybe. Hypertension. Nothing a cup of broth and some time wouldn't solve. "You should rest," Elia had insisted. "If it calls again, it will not care how tired you are." The phrasing had irritated her more than it should have. "It is a resonant feature of the local geology, not a thing with preferences," she'd said. Elia's gaze had been patient, and yet it spoke to you. Mira had retreated to the guest cell anyway, telling herself she needed clearer eyes to look at the data. She'd sat at the small desk under the dim reading lamp, laptop casting bluish light against stone. The spectrograms were as strange and beautiful as they'd been in the chamber. Clean peaks at 33 Hz and its multiples, modulation patterns that looked almost like encoded information. Her cursor hovered over a particularly odd sequence, its undulating amplitude pattern weirdly reminiscent of… what? A waveform she'd seen in EEG recordings, maybe, or songbird calls. Her head had grown heavier. The letters on the screen blurred a little. The previous night's travel and the day's shocks finally began to drag at her like deep water. "Fine," she'd muttered. 20 minutes. She'd closed the laptop. When she opened her eyes, she was sitting at a different desk. The lamp was there, but it was no longer the cheap LED fixture from the guest cell. This one was made of brass, its shade green glass, casting a soft cone of light that seemed both warmer and more solid. The desk beneath her hands was broader, older, scarred by knife marks and ink spills. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. She looked up. She sat at the center of a circular room. The walls rose in a smooth, unbroken curve, lined from floor to ceiling with shelves. On those shelves, books, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some bound in leather, some in cloth, some in materials she didn't recognize. The arrangement was not strictly ordered, yet not random either. There was an underlying pattern she could feel without deciphering. Gaps yawned in some places, spaces where volumes should be, but were not. Above the ceiling was a dome of stone. 8 lamps hung from it at equal intervals, their light overlapping in pools on the floor. They were not electric, not fire either. Their glow was a steady, pulseless white with a hint of blue, like starlight lowered to human height. Her hands were moving. She looked down. A pen, an actual fountain pen, heavy and metal, rested between her fingers. It was trembling, nib hovering over thick, creamy paper. Lines of text already crawled across the page, in a script that was not any language she knew. She didn't remember writing them. Her stomach tightened. "No," she said. Her voice sounded small in the high room. The pen jerked, not from her muscles, from something under them. She clenched her fist around it. "No!" A sound rose around her. And not the 33 Hz hum of the chamber, though it was related. This was higher, brighter, layered with 1,000 tiny crab-like clicks. It came from the shelves, from the books. One by one, volume by volume, they began to tremble. She felt the vibration up through the chair, the desk, her ribs. The lamps brightened. She tried to stand. The chair held her like glue. Her thighs might as well have been bolted down. "Wake up!" she said louder. "This is a dream. Wake up, Mira." The pen touched the paper. Her hand began to write. Symbols poured out, long lines with intersecting diagonals, clusters of tiny dots, shapes like branching rivers. The ink was a color she'd never seen, somewhere between violet and not color, shimmering at the edges. She watched in horror and fascination as the page filled, then another appeared beneath it without her pulling it from any stack. The pen did not leave the paper. Her wrist did not tire. The hum swelled. Somewhere in the library, a book fell from a shelf with a thud that echoed like a drum inside a cathedral. Mira's attention snapped toward the sound. One of the gaps in the shelves was no longer empty. A book lay there, half pushed out, as if it had been shoved from behind. Its binding was a darker shade than the others, almost black. No title. The hum thickened. For a moment, the air jellified. She felt pressure behind her eyes. A voice spoke. This time there was no ambiguity about its intentionality. "Mira Ellison," it said. The pen froze. She squeezed her eyes shut. "No," she whispered. "No, you're..." "Right." The command came like a hand on the back of her neck. She opened her eyes. The pages before her were no longer filled with the strange script. They were blank. The pen hovered over them, point glistening. "Write what?" she asked, using anger like a shield. "In what language? For whom? You're just a hallucination." There was a pause. Then, slowly, letters began to appear on the page without the pen even moving. They were Latin letters, English words. "You will remember me." Her throat closed. The letters faded, the ink evaporating as if it had never been there. The pen jerked in her hand, harder this time, like an animal trying to break free. She shouted, a wordless, furious sound, and wrenched her fingers open. The pen dropped. The moment it left her skin, the library flickered. For a fraction of a second, she saw the walls as basalt, the shelves as empty niches, the lamps as rough-hewn crystals. Then they snapped back to the impossible reality of the dream. The hum dipped, dissonant, agitated. 8 lamps overhead brightened until they were almost painful. Their light swung, though nothing physical moved them. The voice spoke again, now layered with more tones than before, like a choir of itself. "Mira Ellison, we have waited for you." The paper in front of her caught fire. No smoke, no smell. Just a sudden consuming blaze that devoured lines and margins, leaving only blank white behind. The fire climbed her sleeves. She jerked back, toppled the chair, landed hard on stone. The world collapsed in a rush of light and sound. She woke with her own shout still burning her throat. The guest cell was dark except for the dim glow of the hallway bulb under the door. The desk lamp was off. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted out. For a second, she didn't know which reality to trust. The stone walls looked too much like the dreams, the air too similar. Her body felt both too heavy and not real enough. She swung her legs over the side of the narrow bed. Her feet hit cold flagstone. Something crinkled under them. She reached down, fumbling, and her fingers closed on paper. She drew her hand up. A sheet of her own notepad rested between her fingers, the cheap university-issue pad she always carried. Its top half was filled with dense, unfamiliar writing. Symbols, curved lines, clusters of dots, little strokes like teeth. Her heart stopped, then restarted with a painful jolt. She bolted upright and fumbled for the lamp. It clicked on, pouring harsh light onto the desk, the wall, the trembling paper. The pen beside the notepad lay uncapped, its nib darkened with ink. Her right hand was stained the same color to the knuckles. She stared. "No," she whispered. She brought the sheet closer. The characters were not from any orthography she'd studied, and she'd studied a lot. Latin, Greek, Cyrillic, rudiments of Arabic, Devanagari. This was other. Her rational mind queued up explanations, somnambulistic writing, like those rare cases of people composing music in their sleep, stress-induced dissociation. She'd been exposed to unusual stimuli in the chamber. Her brain might be trying to process it in dream form. Except, she turned the paper over. On the back, in the top corner, in her own handwriting, emphatically hers with the impatient tilt and truncated loops, 3 words stood alone. You will remember. She clamped a hand over her mouth. For a long minute she sat motionless, the only sound her breathing and the distant wind outside. Then, very carefully, she folded the page, slipped it into the notebook and closed the cover. She stood, joints creaking, and walked to the small sink. The cold water was shockingly real on her skin as she scrubbed the ink from her fingers. It took a long time to come off. When she finally lifted her head, pale and damp, she met her own eyes in the tarnished mirror. "You are a scientist," she said under her breath. "You collect data. You do not jump to conclusions." Her reflection didn't look convinced. She went back to the desk and opened the laptop, needing to see numbers, spectra, anything concrete. The sensor logs pulsed back at her, 33 Hz, 66, 99, modulation patterns, complex, ordered. Her gaze dragged toward the timestamps. The main anomaly sequences had occurred between 2:13 and 2:15. The corner of her screen displayed the current local time, 2:19. She closed the laptop very gently. Chapter 4. In a dim operations room in a building that did not officially exist, a satellite feed refreshed with its slow, indifferent regularity. The screen showed a grainy overhead view of St. Catherine of the Deep, the monastery courtyard, cloister, chapel roof, the zigzag path down the cliff. The image resolution was good enough to pick out individual figures when they moved. At the moment, only one did. A woman with dark hair tied back in a rough knot, stepping out into the courtyard, hugging her coat tighter against the wind. She paused for a second, looking up at the sky as if she could see the camera that watched her. Then she walked briskly toward the small outbuilding that housed the diesel generator. The operator, mid-30s, nondescript enough to disappear in any cafe in Europe, zoomed in automatically, fingers moving over the keyboard. The image sharpened. The woman's face came into clearer view. Mira Ellison, age 34, Canadian. Doctorate in Geophysics, University of British Columbia. Specialty, acoustic anomalies in solid media. Known associate of several other researchers flagged for interest, though none high priority, until now. A door opened behind him. He didn't turn. "Anything?" a voice asked. "Subject Ellison is awake and moving," the operator said. "No signs she suspects surveillance. Infrared showed elevated heart rate about 20 minutes ago, but it's back to baseline." "Night terror, perhaps," the voice mused. "The environment is stressful." The operator finally glanced over his shoulder. The man who had entered was tall, more from proportion than raw height, his dark suit hanging in the way of expensive things cut to downplay their own quality. His hair was graying at the temples. His eyes were the color of old photographs. He stepped closer, studying the screen. "She's at the generator?" he asked. "Yes, Director," the operator said. Director Aldous Crane watched as Mira disappeared into the small hut. A moment later, the generator's exhaust plume brightened slightly. The lights in the satellite's imaging algorithm flagged a minor increase in output. "Good," Crane said. "We don't want them in the dark. Not yet." He straightened. "Any change in the harmonic pattern?" he asked. The operator tapped. Another screen lit up with graphs, readouts from classified deep ocean monitors that happened to include this region. A series of peaks and valleys marched across. "Same fundamental at 33 Hz, the operator said. "Amplitude up 10% over last cycle. Modulation pattern increasing in complexity." "Show me." The operator brought up a spectrogram. Crane studied it, hands loosely clasped behind his back. He was not a scientist, but he had spent enough time around them that the shapes of certain graphs had imprinted themselves. This one looked structured. "Pattern recognition pass?" he asked. "Already ran it," the operator said. No match to known anthropogenic or natural templates. The closest analog is, well, he hesitated. Yes? Crane said. Some of the neural firing patterns from the Madrid archive, the operator said reluctantly, but the correlation is low fidelity. Crane's jaw tightened. Madrid, 7 days of hallucinations, 1,000 emergency room visits, 3 dozen suicides, triggered by a leaked psychoacoustic file that should never have existed. We scrubbed those traces, he said. Everywhere. Apparently not from the upper mantle, sir, the operator said. Crane made a small, annoyed noise in his throat that might almost have bane a laugh. And our subject? He asked. Any direct exposure to the codex yet? Visual confirmation of her in the resonance chamber for approximately 1 hour this afternoon, the operator said, calling up a stored image. She approached the artifact under supervision of subject Elia Romanova. Physical contact with the case. No access without protective cover that we can see. For now, Crane thought. He'd read the old reports from St. Catherine, the monks' careful Latin, the sisters' more hesitant documentation. The pattern was always the same, a seismic anomaly. The codex artifact humming, some poor devout soul believing they'd heard the voice of God. The Silence Bureau had been formed in part to deal with things like this, things that weren't content to sit quietly in libraries but wanted to spread, to copy themselves into minds and across them. Mimetic hazards, they called them, cognitive contagions, ideas that acted like viruses. The codex was particularly troublesome because no one had ever conclusively demonstrated that it did anything measurable beyond making certain susceptible brains have strange experiences. The seismic anomaly under the monastery was real, yes. The vibrating book was real, yes, but the messages people insisted they received, the languages they supposedly wrote, no one had ever translated them into anything actionable. If anything, Crane thought, that made it more dangerous. A weapon you could quantify, you could counter or contain. A whisper you could not? That was the stuff of cults, of apocalypses. He watched Dr. Ellison emerge from the generator hut, breath fogging. Why her? He said, more to himself than the operator. Her work on long-range coupling of acoustic signals into solid media is significant, the operator said. Her paper last year on mantle-borne echo propagation got a lot of attention. We flagged her as a Category 2 watch at that time, and yet she was allowed to fly to a known SB site and start poking around, Crane said flatly. Assessment suggested she was unlikely to make the critical connections, the operator said carefully. Most don't. The data is obscure. Crane gave him a long look that said clearly, revise those assessments. Open a file, he said. Formalize her as a live variable. The operator hesitated. Sir? Subject designation. Ellison, Mira, tag, Ellison variable. Priority, provisional 3. Upgrade if she exhibits deeper interaction with the artifact. Yes, Director, the operator said. His fingers moved over the keys. On the main screen, Mira paused in the courtyard. She looked up again, that little frown between her brows deepening, as if she felt a lens on her. Eyes on her at all times, Crane said. If the codex wakes up again, I want to know what song it sings this time. Chapter 5. The next morning the sea was calmer. The wind had dropped, leaving a stillness over the cliff that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Mira returned to the resonance chamber as soon as breakfast ended, laptop under her arm, Elia at her side. The nun had asked no questions about the dark circles under her eyes or the stiffness in her shoulders. For that, Mira was grateful. You slept? Elia asked now as they descended the stairs. Eventually, Mira said, which was technically true. For an hour after the dream, she had sat at the desk, forcing herself to take notes. Exact time of awakening, content of dream, the writing on the pad. If she treated it like data, it hurt less. I had interesting dreams. Elia's mouth quirked. We all do down here, Do you dream of libraries? Mira asked. Elia's gaze flicked toward her, surprised. Sometimes, she said slowly. Not often. Why? Mira almost said nothing. The instinct to compartmentalize, the professional reflex to keep personal weirdness separate from the official record, was strong. But she'd come here to listen to the Earth. And the Earth's messages, apparently, did not confine themselves to seismometer channels. I dreamed of a circular library, she said, with 8 lamps and books missing from the shelves. She didn't mention the writing or the voice, not yet. Elia made the sign of the cross without seeming to think about it. Yes, she said softly, that one comes when it is close. When what is close? Mira asked. Elia opened the chamber door. The familiar breath of cold, dry air flowed over them, vibrating faintly. The waking, she said. Inside, nothing had visibly changed. The circular basalt platform, the book niche, the desk with the laptop and data logger, all were as they'd left them. The hum was present, its low note threading the space. Mira took a deep breath and moved to the laptop. She checked the overnight logs first. The tremor pattern had continued between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., with several bursts featuring the now familiar 33 Hz harmonic structure. She flinched when she saw the exact window corresponding to her dream. She suppressed the urge to scroll past it. Instead, she ran a more detailed analysis, wavelet transform, cross-correlation. The patterns were organized, not random, not simple. The modulation of the fundamental frequency over time traced a shape that made her scalp prickle. It looked eerily like the amplitude envelope of a human speech waveform, not in content, but in form. You're seeing something, Ilya observed quietly. I'm seeing a signal, Mira said. A very complex one. If this were coming over a wire, I'd assume someone was trying to encode information. But it is in the stone, Elia said. Who encodes information in stone? People have been encoding information in stone for thousands of years, Mira said. It's called writing. She glanced at the niche. Or something else. She straightened. I want to try one more thing. Elia's expression tightened, but she nodded. I want to touch it directly, Mira clarified. Without the glass, just for a moment, with the sensors running. Elia sucked in a breath. We agreed. We agreed we'd be careful, Mira said. We have data from when I touched the glass. If this thing is coupling to me somehow, I need to know how. Direct contact might show specific changes. I'll be there with you. You can pull me back if I start to convulse, Elia said dryly. Lose track, Mira amended, and I'll be recording everything. Elia hesitated long enough that Mira wondered if she'd refuse outright. Her own heart was pounding, though she did her best not to show it. Finally, the nun nodded once. Very well, she said, but we will set limits. 10 seconds. No more. If you do not answer when I call your name, I pull you away. That's fair, Mira said. Elia walked to the niche and laid her hand flat on the glass. She closed her eyes briefly, lips moving in silent prayer. Then she reached up to the small latch that had been nearly invisible from a distance. With a quiet click, the glass cover lifted. Cold air rolled out and something else. A dry, faintly sweet smell, like old paper and dust and a hint of iron. The book itself looked even older up close, its binding cracked, the leather crazed in patterns like dried riverbeds. The pages' edges were dark, but when she peered down between them, their inner surfaces seemed almost pale. She could see no writing from this angle, no title, no marginalia, just the suggestion of words hidden inside. The hum strengthened. The 33 Hz line on the laptop display brightened. 10 seconds, Elia said. 10 seconds, Mira agreed. She stepped up to the niche. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the vibration wash through her. It felt stronger now, like standing in the path of a speaker you couldn't hear but could feel. Her fingers tingled. She extended her right hand slowly, as if the book were a skittish animal. Her skin prickled before she even touched it, fine hairs lifting. Her palm settled on the leather cover. The contact was electric, not in the shock sense, but in the way her nervous system reacted. All her focus tunneled into that point. The hum in the room vanished, replaced by a more intimate tone that seemed to arise directly from her bones. On the laptop, the peaks at 33, 66, 99 went wild. She felt the book's vibration increase under her palm. Not random shaking, rapid, high-frequency tremor like a purr. The frequency slid upward, then downward, modulating in what might have been a pattern. Her vision dimmed at the edges. For a second she saw, not the basalt chamber, but the circular library again, overlapped, as if someone had double-exposed reality. "Mira?" Elia said. Her voice sounded far away. 5 seconds, Mira managed. She kept her hand on the cover. The hum rose, then broke. Something inside the book moved. She felt it not as motion of pages, but as a shift in some interior gravity. A tug, not on her hand, but on a tension, pulling her inward. Images surged, not coherent scenes, but fragments. A narrow stone room lit by candles. A man in a brown habit crying out as his hand wrote without his consent. A woman in a black veil waking with ink on her cheeks. A ship struggling in heavy seas. A city she did not recognize under a storm of strange light. Faces, voices, her own echoed. The signal in her head organized itself, Mira. This time there was no chorus, it was singular, focused. "You are late." Her chest tightened. "Late for what?" she said aloud without meaning to. "Mira!" Elia said sharply. Her hand clamped on Mira's shoulder. The contact was like a switch. The chamber snapped back. The library vanished, the hum cut off. Mira jerked her hand away from the book. Her knees buckled. Elia caught her with surprising strength, easing her down onto the basalt floor. For a moment, all Mira could do was gasp, her heart pounding, her senses flooded by too much input. The stone under her palms felt almost hot. 10 seconds, Elia said. Her voice was tremulous. "You stole 2 more. "Sorry," Mira croaked. She sat back against the platform and forced her eyes open. The book sat in its niche, perfectly still, as if it had never moved. The glass cover remained propped up. It looked ordinary, old, innocent. The laptop beeped with a buffer warning. The spectrogram was a riot of color around the time of contact. The 33 Hertz line had split into multiple, closely spaced bands, like a voice going through rapid vibrato. The amplitude had doubled. She swallowed, trying to force her thoughts into words. "It recognized me," she said before she could decide not to. Elia settled beside her. "What did you hear?" "You are late," Mira quoted, "as if I was supposed to have been here earlier." Elia considered that. Could it be speaking of the years since the others? "Since Thael, Magdalena?" Mira shook her head. "If so, that's a very long time to hold a grudge." She rubbed her throbbing temples. "Or maybe it's my subconscious assigning narrative structure to random stimuli." "Is that what it feels like?" Elia asked gently. She thought of the precise way the harmonics had shifted when she touched the book, of the structured speech-like pacing of the internal voice, of her own name, spoken in a way no one had ever quite said it. "No," she admitted. Elia reached past her and lowered the glass cover carefully, as if tucking the book in. "You can look at your lines on the machine," she said. "See if they satisfy your scientist. But I would also advise talking to your dreams, Dr. Ellison. They are trying very hard to talk to you." Mira almost laughed. "You realize how that sounds," she said. "Yes," Elia said, "and after 40 years in this place, I no longer care." Later, alone at the desk in the resonance chamber, Mira studied the data. She'd exported the raw sensor logs to run more advanced analyses than the laptop could handle in real time. The sequence corresponding to her direct contact with the book was a mess, and beautiful. The fundamental tremor had not only increased in amplitude, its phase relationship to the higher harmonics had shifted in precise, coordinated ways. She ran a coherence analysis between the geophone signal on the floor and the accelerometer on the book. Coupling was high, very high. Almost as if the book were not a passive object vibrating in response to the ground, but an active node in a resonant system. She stared at the correlation coefficients. 98%, 99. "You're impossible," she muttered to the graph. The phrase non-geological source coupling into rock from her own forum post came back to her like an accusation. Something was driving this, something that used the rock and the book as conduits. "Something that uses it," she heard Elia say in memory. She rubbed her eyes. The edges of the dream library still clung to her peripheral vision like afterimages. On impulse, she pulled the notepad from her pocket. The page she'd written in her sleep, or whatever had written through her, looked no less strange by daylight. The symbols were precise, almost calligraphic. Not random doodles, lines stacked in regular bands, some reappearing with small variations, as if the writing itself were a kind of code. She laid the notepad next to a printout of the 33 Hz modulation envelope from her Dreamtime window. Her breath caught. The shapes matched. Not perfectly. A living hand, even in a trance, was not a plotting algorithm, but enough. Peaks where ink lines were longer, troughs where they were short. The overall waveform of the tremor signal over those 2 minutes traced the same broad patterns as the text on the page. She checked the time stamps. The dream had been between 2:13 and 2:15. The sensor logs showed the most complex modulation in that window. She sat very still for a moment. "Well?" she said quietly. "Shit." It wasn't yet proof of anything beyond a profound weirdness. Her brain, primed by exposure to the chamber, might have unconsciously internalized the waveform shapes and reproduced them as writing. There were a dozen ways to rationalize it, but beneath the trained skeptic, a different part of her, the part that had learned to trust intuition when staring at messy datasets, whispered, "You are not the only one writing here." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She jumped. No one should be calling her here. The monastery's cell coverage was patchy at best, only occasionally catching a signal from a passing satellite. She fumbled it out. No caller ID, just unknown. She hesitated, then answered. "Ellison." Static crackled, then a man's voice, distorted slightly by compression and distance. "Dr. Ellison," he said. "This is Jonas Vale." She frowned. "I don't know that name." "Yes, you do," he said mildly. "You replied to one of my articles once, the piece on the Helsinki microburst. You called my interpretation of the data alarmist, speculative, and poorly graphed." Despite everything, she huffed a laugh. "If I did, you probably deserved it." "I did," he said. "But I kept the email. You have a way with scathing adjectives." "How did you get this number?" she asked. "I'm calling through a relay," he said. "Don't worry, I'm not in your contacts. And I don't plan to be. I just needed to say one thing." He paused, as if choosing his words. "The place you're in," he said. "St. Catherine's. You think you're there to study rock. Maybe an odd resonance, a new kind of tremor. You're not. Or rather, you're only partly there for that. There is something in that monastery that people have been worrying about for a long time." "You're going to have to be more specific," she said, though her heart rate had picked up again. "They call it the Codex," he said. Her mouth went dry. "How do you know that?" "Because I stole reports from very unpleasant people who study things like this for a living," he said. "They classify it as a potential mimetic hazard, a weaponized idea, for lack of a better term." Mira swiveled in the chair, suddenly feeling very exposed, despite being deep under rock. The book sat in its niche, silent under the glass. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because the last time someone got this close to decoding one of those things, a lot of people in Madrid ended up seeing things that weren't there and stepping off very high places," he said. "And because your posts on Deep Trace suggest you're about 10 minutes away from making a connection that will be very hard to unmake." "I'm not decoding anything," she said. I'm just listening. Sometimes listening is enough, he said. Sometimes that's exactly the problem. She swallowed, throat tight. You sound like my mother, she said, more harshly than she meant to. She used to say some music shouldn't be written down. Your mother was a composer, he said, studied at McGill, known for her work on microtonal. I know who my mother was, she snapped. He let the silence sit for a moment. Look, he said more gently, I'm not saying run. God knows I've never been good at that myself. I just want you to be aware that whatever is humming under your feet is not neutral, and you're not the first person it has spoken to. A memory flashed, Brother Thael's terrified Latin, Sister Magdalena's shaking script, the words in her own notebook. You think it's sentient? She asked, astonished to hear herself give voice to the thought. I think it behaves like something that wants to spread, he said, which is close enough. Mira stood, pacing the few steps the cable lengths allowed. What do these unpleasant people want with it? She asked. Depends on the decade, he said. Sometimes they want to weaponize it. Sometimes they want to bury it. Right now, I think they're leaning toward burying. But that means anyone who might wake it up is of particular interest. The Silence Bureau, she said. He was quiet for a beat too long. You know the name. I read your articles, she said. The ones no mainstream outlet would publish. Flattered, he said dryly. Yes, them. You think they're watching me, she said. I'd be very surprised if they weren't, he said. They've had eyes on St. Catherine's since at least the 50s, and your research profile lights up all kinds of lights on their boards. Mira glanced up at the ceiling, as if she could see through rock, through the chapel, through the courtyard, up into the sky, where some unseen lens might be turned her way. Why are you calling me? She asked again. Really? There was a pause. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Because I used to think I could dance around this kind of thing, he said. Get close, get the story, then get out before any of it stuck to me. Madrid taught me otherwise. There are some songs you hear once and they never leave you. I just wanted you to have a chance to decide whether you want to listen. She closed her eyes. I came all this way, she said. I can't just pack up and go home because a stranger on a secure line tells me a scary bedtime story. He chuckled without humor. Didn't think you would. People like you don't. That's why the Bureau is always so busy. People like me, she said. The ones the Codex calls, he said. Her skin went cold. I never told you there was a book, she said quietly. You didn't have to, he said. It always starts with the humming. Then comes the book. Then come the dreams. She thought of the circular library, the writing on the pad, the voice saying you are late. Then what? She asked. He exhaled. Through the cheap codec it sounded like static. Then comes the choice, he said. Whether you write it down, whether you let it finish. Finish what? She demanded. He hesitated. That's what I'm trying to find out, he said. And if you're still sane in a week, maybe you can help me. The line clicked and went dead. Mira stared at the phone. Then she very carefully placed it face down on the desk, walked to the center of the chamber, and stood on the basalt circle listening. The hum was faint at this moment, a low, steady thrum. But underneath it, perhaps only in imagination, she thought she heard something else. The approach of a note not yet sung. That night when the Earth's subsonic heart beat a little faster and the spectrogram scrolled another band of strange, ordered colors, the book under glass began to vibrate again. Dust sifted from the ceiling in a thin veil. In her narrow cell, Mira lay awake, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her notebook sat on the desk, closed, the ink inside dry. Her skin prickled. She didn't get up, not yet. She listened as the hum built, as if climbing a scale only it knew. In the control room in the building that did not exist, the operator looked up as the 33 Hertz line brightened. Director, he said. It's starting again. On the satellite feed, Mira left her bed and walked toward the door. Crane folded his hands. "Watch closely," he said. "The Ellison variable is engaging." Back in the resonance chamber, alone this time, Mira stood before the niche. The glass cover reflected her face faintly, overlaying the old leather binding. She rested her fingertips against it. The hum rose, threading through her veins. "What are you?" she whispered. Inside the book, something turned. The vibration leapt. The entire chamber shuddered. The sensors spiked. On the spectrogram, the 33 Hertz line split, multiplied, became a braid of frequencies weaving in and out with intricate precision. On the surface of the book, under the cover, the pages began to turn, not by wind, not by gravity. They riffled, stopped, riffled again, as if some invisible reader were skimming for a particular place. Mira's breath hitched. "I know you can hear me," she said, pulse pounding. "You've been talking to people here for centuries. Thael, Magdalena, the others. You called my name before I was born. You said I'm late." The hum peaked, then steadied a held note. She leaned closer, forehead almost touching the glass. "What are you?" she whispered again, the words barely air. And for the briefest moment, in the tiny gap between vibration peaks, as if the silence itself had spoken, she heard a word. Not in English, not in any language she knew. But she understood it. Remember. The book's hum intensified. The basalt floor under her feet thrummed like the skin of a drum. The entire monastery resonated. Far above in the chapel, the chalices on the altar rang gently against one another. In the dormitory, picture frames on the walls rattled. In the kitchen, a stack of plates chimed like a distant off-key carillon. The sisters paused in their evening prayers, eyes lifting, not in fear, but in something like recognition. In the sky, the satellite recorded a subtle, island-wide vibration, its sensors logging data its designers had never envisioned. In the operations room, the operator's eyes widened. "Sir, the amplitude—" "I see it," Crane said tightly. "Mark this. We'll need every frame." In Lisbon, Jonas's hacked feed blinked briefly with an alert. He watched as the spectrogram from a stolen channel lit up and felt a sympathetic hum behind his own eyes. In the resonance chamber, at the heart of it all, Mira Ellison stood with her hand on the glass, eyes reflecting the faint, impossible glow from the pages beneath. Her lips moved. "What are you?" she breathed again, the question now less demand than invitation. The answer came, not as a word this time, but as a wave of remembered sound, of images not her own, of 8 lamps swinging over a circular space, of a mind stretched across centuries waiting to be written. Her knees trembled. She held her ground. The codex hummed louder, like a throat clearing before speech. "Fade out,"